Hello there, all you wonderful people in the digital world, and welcome back once again to another episode of Spliced In Later. It's been a minute since I last dropped an episode to you, but that's okay because the week before last week, when I didn't give you anything, I gave you 4 episodes, pretty much in quick succession, 4 days in a row. So there was plenty of content, and sometimes they can be too much of a good thing, so I didn't want to overwhelm you with too many spliced in later to listen to. I'll just listen to none of it. And also, sometimes you just need a break as well for me. So we're back at our regularly scheduled time for our regularly scheduled program to talk about some stuff before we get cracking into the last couple movies that I will eventually be reviewing before the end of the year to see if they will shake up my top 10 movies of 2022 in any particular way. I really don't know. There's one I'm seeing this weekend, which I didn't think anything about, but the reviews are coming in and apparently it could be the greatest animated movie of all time. And then, of course, there's Avatar: The Way of Water. I won't talk about that much now. I'll give you the gist. Not the gist. I'll give you the rundown and the lowdown of my opinion of the original Avatar and James Cameron, the man as a whole, and the whole lead up to Avatar 2 and the box office and the disputes between film companies and all of that shit when I review the movie. The movie's over 3 hours long, so the review may as well be a long one. But I hope I like it. I hope I do. I don't want to hate things. I just sometimes hate people, and that affects my ability to like things. But we will see. I will be honest and open about my opinions of the movie. I'll say right now I don't want to like it. But if I do, I will admit it. Anyway, today's episode is sort of not really reviewing something that's new because it's been over for a bit, but it's also not really the standard looking for something in the archives of a film and TV history to talk about. The only real reason I'm talking about it is because I've accidentally set a precedent by talking about all this other stuff before, which is basically that every time there's been a new Star Wars live-action TV show on Disney+, I have talked about it, whether it's been while the show's been on or to review the show as a whole. And I didn't intend to talk about every single live-action TV show that drops, but I've done it enough times now that it's kind of expected. When Book of Boba Fett finished, I was asked, why don't you talk about the Book of Boba Fett? You talked about The Mandalorian, and you didn't really talk about The Mandalorian what had really taken off. And since Boba Fett's basically just another season of Mandalorian, why don't you use this time to talk about it now? And then Obi-Wan Kenobi finishes, and you get, well, you talked about the Book of Boba Fett. Why don't you talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi? You said that Obi-Wan Kenobi is your favoriteest character in Star Wars, so why would you not talk about it? And now, as is the case, you talked about Obi-Wan Kenobi, so why don't you talk about this new one? So I guess in the future, this will be what I do. If there's a live-action Star Wars TV show, I'll talk about it. I don't think I'll talk about seasons. When The Mandalorian Season 3 finishes, I won't talk about it again. You talk about it once, and then we move on. So this one we're talking about, it's a little show called Andor, which has just finished a 12-week run on Disney+. So 12 episodes. It's the most episodes a Star Wars live-action TV show has got. It's a unique concept. It's starring a character that may or may not have made it out of Rogue One alive. Rogue One, if you don't know, is I wouldn't say it's a prequel or a midquel or a sequel. It's like the missing chapter between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy of Star Wars. That sort of shows how things were put into motion for the original 1977 Star Wars movie to go ahead. And one of the characters in that movie was Cassian Andor, a high-ranking leader of the Rebel Alliance that helps Felicity Jones's Jyn Erso instigate a series of events that will lead them to steal the plans for the Empire's ultimate weapon, the Death Star, starting everything that we ever knew about Star Wars ever was and ever will be. That movie came out in 2016, so now, 6 years later, I guess why not? Let's do a prequel show about Cassian Andor set just before Rogue One, so it's on borrowed time. We've been told in advance that there's only going to be a 2-season run of this show, so we're already halfway there. But it basically follows the origin of Cassian Andor, how he goes from just some nobody renegade on an unfamiliar planet being crushed on the Empire's boot for a series of trials and tribulations that will eventually lead him to join the Rebel Alliance and fight back against the Empire. That's basically it. It's not just Cassian's story. There's a lot of other side stories going along. Our other two main characters are Star Wars staple character Mon Mothma, played by Genevieve O'Reilly, and the political intrigue of her operating in the Empire's fascist Senate while operating behind the scenes to stir some sort of rebellion. And then a new character, Luthen Rawl, played by Stellan Skarsgård, the man, the myth, the legend, one of the best actors in the world, who is a very, very dedicated cause to destroying the Empire, not above manipulating others to help achieve that goal. But at the end of the day, it's Cassian's story. It's not really a review. Is this a review, or is this just this is the thing that happened? I don't know. I guess my review would be, if you want to know what my opinion of, was that it is very good. I don't love it as much as everybody else does. Everyone else seems absolutely amazed at this show and thinks it's the best thing Star Wars has ever done in quite some time. And they could be right. It's not my favorite Star Wars thing, but I don't know. In terms of new ground for Star Wars to cover, it's definitely a breath of fresh air, and it's very well directed. It's very well acted, and there are some really, really cool, awesome moments in this show. My main issue I had with it is probably just an issue that comes with the way the show is dished out, is that it was on a weekly basis, and this is a big show with long episodes. But some storylines, for example, let's say Mon Mothma, you would only check in with her for like one scene of about 6 minutes. And then if you wanted to know where her story went, you had to wait until next week to see that story inched along, if she did even appear at all. Same with Stellan Skarsgård as well. And as for Cassian Andor, I found in the show that he went through 3 separate arcs, which one could argue you could take those arcs and maybe just turn them into TV movies. But it meant that in some instances, Cassian was stuck in the same place for 3 to 4 weeks as tension was building towards an eventual climax. The climax of every arc was always really exciting and the best part of the show. But there were a couple of times where I was like, okay, I get it. Cassian's miserable. I get it. He's in prison. We need to move along. But this is early days. This is hard for me to review knowing that it's part of a 2-season plan. The second season might lock this all in together and be just a complete, perfect storytelling from start to finish. I guess what I'm just trying to get out of the way is that at the moment, everyone's like, Andor is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And most of my friends that have watched it would agree with them on that. I just had trouble getting excited about it. And I don't think it's amazing. That's all. I think it's really, really, really good. But I don't think it's like, oh, this is what Star Wars needs. Because the thing I want to get into with Star Wars, and here's the positives and negatives of Andor here. I've said this the few times that I've talked about Star Wars on here, because if you're a regular listener on this channel, on this Spotify, on this whatever you're listening to, the YouTubes, whatever, you will know that I have a rocky history with Star Wars at the moment, at this point in time. I absolutely loved it as a kid growing up. I thought it was fantastic. I liked the prequel trilogy because I was a kid when the prequel trilogy was coming out, so I thought it was pretty good. And as a result, now when I look back on it, I look back on it with nostalgia. I don't think they're terrible. I don't think they deserve the hate that they get sometimes. But I do also appreciate that the original Star Wars trilogy is better than it. So I get it. I get the understanding if you were a huge original trilogy Star Wars fan. But for the most part, I thought it was all pretty good. There were high highs, there were low lows, but I liked the world of Star Wars, and I liked that story of the rise of Anakin Skywalker, the fall of Darth Vader, his eventual redemption at the hands of his son Luke. It's a very solid, contained story. Even if it didn't have the prequel trilogy, servable stuff. And then there's always been companion stuff. There's the animated TV shows, guest spots, special appearances, all of that. But it was based around that same thing. And then we went through the debacle of George Lucas selling Star Wars to Disney, and then Disney once again doing what they do best when they get something new. They blow their load before they've even had a chance to really stimulate themselves, if you will pardon that analogy. It was, well, we're making a trilogy of new movies, and then we're making a trilogy of side films, and then basically there's going to be a new Star Wars movie every year, and we're also going to have live action shows on our Disney Plus streaming service. It's just going to be Star Wars constantly. It's kind of like what the MCU is going through right now. The difference being is that the MCU has always sort of maintained a direction and a level of quality. You could argue that the quality is waning now, but in its point where it was wrapping up its Infinity Saga, it knew what it wanted to do and it knew how to did it. How to did it. That's a good term from me. Star Wars was never planned once it got hold of Disney, as you can tell from that sequel trilogy, where every director who got a hold of a movie did not know what they were going to do. There was no set plan of how the Adventures of Rey and Friends was going to go, meaning that you had drastically different films from different directors who wanted to take Star Wars in different ways. And when the public reacted negatively, say to Rian Johnson's very unique but iffy approach to Star Wars with Episode 8, the response from Disney was to completely pull away from that and go in the complete opposite direction for Star Wars Episode 9, but too far in the opposite direction, thereby losing any sort of coherency and identity and vibe and quality that you would get from Star Wars. And then the side movies are okay, but at that point, when you're already disappointed in what Star Wars is becoming, it's just more content that you feel obligated to look at. The MCU, if you're listening, take notes. Don't do this. And that's the thing. Star Wars has an issue when it comes to creativity. MCU has a lot going on. There's too much at the moment, I would probably agree. But it at least has variety. The different shows and characters that it explores inhabit very different worlds of the MCU. Seeing an adventure, Thor hanging out with Zeus and the gods is very different from, say, the boots on the ground, Captain America, Winter Soldier, political thriller, conspiracy thing. As a result, because of all those different types of genres and vibes and storytelling, everything always feels fresh. It feels like new content to building on an established world, but having its own identity. Star Wars has always had that trouble because it cannot pull away from the things that people know about Star Wars. Jedis, Sith, the Empire, the fall of the Republic, the Rebel Alliance, Tusken Raiders, Stormtroopers, Death Star, all of these things. Whatever you get from Star Wars, regardless of what period it's set in the Star Wars timeline, it's always affected by these things. These things are the defining trait that takes your story in a particular direction. Andor, as much as I think it's great and it is unique for Star Wars because it does try to tell its own story with new characters and it doesn't focus on Jedis and Sith and all of that stuff, there's not a single lightsaber to be found. The defining drive, the defining trait that's in the background is still the Empire. The Empire is what makes the story happen. I would love one day if Star Wars gives us a show that is set outside of this time period, away from when the Empire ever existed. You know, you've got the First Order in the sequel trilogy for Disney, but it's basically just the Empire 2.0. Go as far into the future as you can where the Empire doesn't exist anymore, or as far into the past as you can without Jedis and Sith, which seems impossible, or pull as far away into the galaxy. It's a galaxy. Go as far out into the distance onto some planet that's so far in the outer rim that is not affected by anything going on, and then try and tell a story. And I would be interested to see if Star Wars could tell a story that did not have any of these things influencing the story, and if it could come up with its own unique ideas and characters and mythology and all of that stuff. As of this point, Andor is a step in the right direction, but it's not quite there. The positivities of this show, though, is it is incredibly well acted. Diego Luna's Cassian Andor goes on one hell of a journey on this show. He gets put through the ringer. And what I really like about Diego Luna's acting is he can do a lot without saying a word. He can give you a look and you can tell exactly what he's feeling in that moment. And the triumphant moments when he manages to overcome odds or when he manages to push out against the oppressors against him, they are very cheer-worthy moments. Our other main actors, Stellan Skarsgård, has some incredible monologues and some really powerful moments, which I thought were really great too. Mon Mothma, Genevieve O'Reilly, I thought was great, but I don't feel like I got enough of her in here. I hope we get to see more of her in season 2. There's a large assortment of supporting actors in here, assorted characters. There's some creepy ass Mother's boy is Cyril Khan, who's constantly hunting Cassian, who is going on a very interesting journey in this show. And he feels like a real slow burn, so I'm interested to see where that goes. Andy Serkis puts in a really interesting guest spot as a fellow prisoner that Cassian Andor is locked up with. And his 3-episode emotional journey is probably some of the best stuff I've ever seen on TV. In terms of the direction and the quality, it's again, Andor's one of those things that shows that the line is blurring between a TV show and a movie. You would be forgiven if you thought you were just watching scenes from a movie cut up and put onto a TV show, which is pretty great stuff. As I said, it's probably would be better if you were able to watch it all back to back in one go. I'm not sure. It might be a bit of a slog to get through 12 episodes, but I feel like the thing about streaming services that was so good, the thing that Netflix nailed originally in its first go, was the binge watching format. When they drop shows like Daredevil or Stranger Things or Cobra Kai, all the episodes are readily available and you can watch through them. You don't have to watch them all in the same evening. You don't have to be an idiot like me and watch every episode of The Sandman on a Friday night before you can go to sleep. But you can watch them relatively in quick succession, so the information that you're retaining stays in your mind. When you have to wait week after week, you do struggle to remember characters, remember names, remember all these people. And in some instances, some streaming services don't even bother with previously recaps. I don't know if they're not doing that because in the future, when all the episodes are available to binge, people won't need them. But if people are tuning in week after week, like unfortunately I have to do, because if I don't, internet just spoils everything for me. Everyone's in a race to spoil something for other people as fast as possible. As I've said before, I don't understand the need to know everything about a product before you've consumed the product. I feel like that takes away the experience. But when you're going on a 12-episode journey with these characters on a weekly basis, with episodes up to 55 to over an hour long, with oodles and oodles of characters being introduced, and then you're expected to remember everybody's names, everybody's motivations, what everybody did the previous week, it becomes a struggle, especially for someone like me, who's a bit of a stupid head. There's one moment in the show where Andor is preparing for his first real rebel attack. So he's hanging out on this forest place with a bunch of 7 or 8 new characters that were introduced. And there's literally a scene where Val, who's the leader of this group, says, "This is Horace, Jasper, Ronaldo, the Duke, Cambridge, Mrs. Anderson, Papa Noi, and my favorite of all of us, Jing." Cool. I'm never going to mention those names again. You have to remember them. But whatever, that's fine. But then in sideways, people are talking about each other going, "You should really be suspicious of the Duke." And you have to go, which one was the Duke? I don't remember. So that for me ruined my ability to really appreciate what was going on, because I was not moving at a fast pace to keep all the information I was supposed to retain. Again, it might be different if I have a rewatch of it, but if you're going to distribute a show like this on a weekly basis and you want people to tune in week after week, you have to give us something there. You have to take that into account, I guess. Overall, I don't know what I've really said about Andor. No, I think I've made my opinions very clear about Star Wars as a whole. I think Andor is a very well-made show. I think it is a step in the right direction for Star Wars, pulling away from that main Star Wars stuff that creatively the franchise has never been able to move away from. But I don't think it's pulled far enough away that we should celebrate it. It needs to pull enough away that the Empire has no place in any Star Wars thing. Just give it a try and see what happens. The show is very enjoyable to watch and has some really powerful moments, and I am excited for season 2. I think it built to a very good climax to stop the show on, to really move Cassian Andor from one particular place at the start of the show to where he is at the end. The whole show is powered along by some exceptional direction, some great lead acting in Diego Luna and Stellan Skarsgård, and some great supporting actors in here that give really memorable guest appearances like Andy Serkis or Forrest Whitaker. It's just, for me, I don't love it as much as everybody else did. That may be the trap of Star Wars. I want it to be different. I want it to pull away from established content and tell its own stories. But I may still just enjoy seeing Obi-Wan Kenobi because I remember Obi-Wan Kenobi and I like Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's a real dilemma that Star Wars is in, and I don't have the mental capacity to figure it out for him. But maybe don't listen to me, because people love Andor. People think Andor is the bee's knees, and it's just, this is what Star Wars should have been all along. I agree it's very good. I don't think it's incredible. I've seen a bunch of other shows this year that I would agree are better than Andor. I think She-Hulk's better than Andor. I think Miss Marvel's better than Andor. I think Cobra Kai is better than Andor. Again, that's probably just on a personal preference and the ability to stream the show I want to see. So I'd be really interested, if people are listening, if they would like to comment, if they would like to tell me what they thought of Andor, if they had any of the issues I had, or if they didn't have any issues at all. Or if they just don't care. If you couldn't give a shit about Andor, why did you listen to this whole episode? One thing I do request, though, which is one thing that always happens every time I talk about Star Wars, is it's the only product, it's the only thing I talk about where people who listen, for some reason, feel they need to take the time to email me directly to tell me why I'm wrong. To tell me why either I'm wrong about Star Wars being creatively bankrupt, or why I'm wrong for liking a particular thing about Star Wars. If Star Wars is anything, it is the one thing that has the ability to make everybody angry at each other and drive a wedge. Drive a wedge between everyone and everything. So if there are any positive Star Wars comments, if there are any positive Andor comments, I'd love to hear them. If you can bring yourself to do it after I've just been relatively blah about the whole thing. But there you are, I talked about Andor. I can add it to the list of shows, Star Wars live action shows that I've talked about. I can't see any more live action shows on the horizon that are brand new. So who knows? Maybe when eventually it's going to happen. When a new one comes out, maybe I'll enjoy it more and I'll have more of an enthusiastic approach. But to be honest, I don't really care anymore. So there's that. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. I don't know when I'll be back. I definitely will be back next week at the normal time. I just don't know if I might be back before that, because my movie that I'm seeing this week is technically on the weekend. So theoretically I could review it on the weekend, but I might just let it lay over. Be able to give you a couple of reviews in 1 week next week, and then one last little Christmas episode before Merry Christmas, everyone. And then we'll have our top 10 movies of 2022. So we'll just have to wait and see. If you're subscribed, you'll know. If you're not, subscribe or don't. I really don't care. But thank you very much again. I love and appreciate you as always. It's always a talk. It's always a talk. It's always a talk and a treat to talk to you, even if it's very positive or very either way, I'll catch you all next week. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.